Recovery means to me is freedom and peace.
There is hope.
Recovery is awesome.
Recovery works.
Recovery is possible. There is hope.
Recovery is possible. There is hope.
Recovery to me means freedom. Recovery is possible.
Recovery works. Recovery is always possible. It's fantastic.
Progress, not perfection.
Recovery is possible.
Recovery works.
Recovery is a journey, not a destination.
Welcome to Montana's Peer Network Recovery Talks podcast. I'm Jim Haney, Executive Director, and today I have a very special guest with me. She has been on before. She's a certified peer support specialist at Montana State Hospital. She's a longtime member of MPN. She's an advocate, and I really like doing podcasts with her. And so I invited her to come back. Sami, why don't you introduce yourself and tell everybody a little bit about who you are.
Yeah, sure. Well, thank you for having me. It's quite an honor. I got into peer support. I took the peer support journey. I started it in January of 22, and I did a lot of webinars and online trainings, even more than you need to get your license, because I'm that passionate about recovery. Presently, I've been doing a lot of advocacy work and joining as many councils across the state and also here locally. I do work part-time doing peer support at the state hospital. I definitely feel when I leave every day that I work that I'm making a difference, and that keeps me coming back.
Nice. That's such a good feeling, isn't it? When you have a job that, when you're done for the day, you feel like you actually made a difference.
Absolutely. And it's really, there's really no words to really describe the feeling in its entirety.
Well, today we thought we would talk a little bit about mental health crisis and maybe try to give the listeners a little insight into what that experience is like. Sami and I are both people who've experienced mental health crisis and been hospitalized and then, found recovery. And because I've been thinking about this topic, and, you and I visited over the summer where we were talking, I was doing interviews about the crisis system, right? And putting that together for some guides and some advocacy work. But in that, I got thinking about, if you're a person who's never experienced mental health crisis, you don't really know, like, unless you've gone through that. And so I thought, boy, that would be a great topic to come back to and have Sami come on and for you and I to just share our personal experiences with mental health crisis and our thoughts around it and what helped and what didn't, and just what the experience is like and the aftermath of it in our lives and what happens, and then how we can find recovery. We found recovery, how people can find recovery, to just help people out there who, like I said, may not have ever had that experience. Because it's one thing to say, well, we need services, we need crisis services, but if you've never had that experience, you might not understand why we need that and why that's so important. And I think by us sharing our experiences, maybe that would give people some insight into it. So Sami agreed to come on, and I know you're also passionate about this topic also. I mean, you work at the state hospital, which is not so much in the moment of a crisis with a person, but it's part of what can happen if the person doesn't get help or get treatment, and how things can get worse. But before we jump into that, let's just start, Sami, with I'll just put it out there. Let's just start by sharing our feelings when we say mental health crisis. What comes to mind for you?
Honestly, a tremendous amount of fear. Um,
Mm,
I've been stable and in recovery for over 6.5 years. Prior to that, my experience with mental health crisis was, to say the least, astronomical for me. I have been to um, all of the, I wouldn't say all, but I've been to the majority of crisis stabilization units that are in a hospital, like a regular physical health hospital. I've been to a majority of Western's residential crisis service houses throughout the state that are unfortunately now not operating. And I have probably, if I were to guess, had 10 hospitalizations to the state hospital. So when I say that being in crisis uh, provides me with a tremendous amount of fear, that is very accurate. Um, if we want to discuss how I'm living in recovery and how I'm embracing recovery, we can do that in another podcast. But for this one, I think that to describe mental health crisis, um, if it goes too far, there's a huge amount of denial.
mm, mm,
Uh, my very first time meeting you, I was sitting at my dad's kitchen table, and you were visiting with my dad in the kitchen area, and you had a younger gentleman with you with dark hair that was trying to get me to go to Hope House. And at that point in my crisis, the denial had set in. So no, I'm not going to Hope House. No, I'm not going to Hope House. And if a person can't voluntarily go to a crisis center, my experience has been further decompensation and law enforcement involvement. Whether that means that I was out wandering the streets because of psychosis, because of crisis, and I get picked up for loitering, I get picked up for trespassing, I get picked up for disorderly conduct, and then you go to jail, right?
yeah.
So, in a way, this also leads into the criminalization of mental health, um, especially since the residential crisis houses that were sparsed throughout our state, the majority of them are now group homes. That is even more of criminalization of mental health and mental health crisis uh, patients, clients, individuals, people who are being housed in jail
Yeah.
awaiting their commitment.
Yeah. 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 It's interesting. As I was listening to you, I'm thinking about my own experience and prepping for the podcast, but you went in that direction of criminalization and it made me think instantly when you said that about the first time. This is the first time I was hospitalized. Before I was hospitalized, I was at the hospital. I was in the emergency room, and I was there for a suicide attempt. And they were trying to figure out if they needed to pump my stomach. I had taken a bunch of pills, and I remember a sheriff's deputy coming in and handcuffing me to the bed rail. Didn't say anything, didn't explain anything, didn't no comforting words, just came in and said, I'm going to put these on you, and handcuffed me to the bed rail. And the first thing I thought was just what you said: I'm going to jail for trying to kill myself. And he walked out of the room, and I was sitting there alone. uh I don't know how long. I can't remember exactly. It's you're not in the right kind of frame of mind. But I'm sitting there going, oh my gosh, I'm going to jail. I'm at a hospital and I'm going to jail. Now, I didn't go to jail. They admitted me to the behavioral health unit. But as soon as you said that, criminalizing mental health, that that just popped in my mind. And even to this day, that's 20 some years later, um, it's still traumatic to me. And I still look back at that and I think, God, that was terrible. There was no one there talking to me. There was nobody. And that's the first, the next person that came in and, you know, we're going to basically take you into custody. And we still do that today. We still treat people like that and worse. And it just amazes me that happened to me, but it continues to happen. As a peer supporter, I saw that happen many times. Yeah, it's just, and I think if you're a listener out there and you've never had a mental health crisis, this is real. This is what happens to people. And Sami, can you talk more about that? Your experience with like, did you know, at what point did you know you were having what was there a point where you knew you were having a mental health crisis?
So, the first time I went to Warm Springs was 2009. And the very first time I did a RAP plan, a Wellness Recovery Action Plan, was sometime between 2005 and 2009. I'm not sure exactly what year, but we would meet once a week in the evening after work hours in a park. So obviously it was summertime, and we did a RAP plan. And so over the years, I constantly revisit it, right? Because I didn't want, my intention was not to go back to Warm Springs. My intention was not to be in that situation again.
Mhm.
So the question of when do I know that I'm in crisis? I know through doing a RAT plan what my stressors are. If I don't take care of those stressors, they're going to turn into early warning signs. And if I don't take care of those early warning signs, it's going to be when things are breaking down. And when things are breaking down, it's too late. That's what it looks like the week before I get committed.
Okay,
So for instance, um, during before one of my hospitalizations, it was 2015, and it was about April of 2015. And I called Gallatin Mental Health. I knew I was going manic, and I knew if I didn't take care of it, that it was going to progress, and I didn't want that to happen. So in my cabinet, I had a leftover bottle of Abilify. So I started taking those. And after about a week, I noticed that they were working. So I called Western. I said, I need to make an appointment. This is what my situation is, and I need to be seen to get another script. And they said, well, you're no longer an active patient. Despite the fact that I'd been a patient for 10 years, uh, they said, you're no longer an active patient, and the earliest appointment we have is a month and a half out. So I raised some hell on the phone. I
sure.
said, "Well, I can't wait that long. If I wait
Right.
that long, I'm gonna be in Warm Springs."
Yeah.
And after that, I called my medical provider, my medical doctor. I explained the whole situation to his nurse. I said, "This is what's happening. This is the medication. This is the dosage. Can you please write me one script until I can get into Western?" Oh, they discussed it. They called me back. No, he doesn't feel comfortable doing that. So what ended up happening, Jim, is I went on I went full blown psychotic within that month. I thought, I mean, I don't know if you want me to go into what it was like, but I'm comfortable doing that.
Whatever you're comfortable doing, Sammy, I think
So,
that's
I thought that I was God's given gift to prevent World War III, and that that all the satellites from the United Nations were watching me and my actions, and that I was going to prevent World War III.
hmm,
Uh, I took my kids with me and did what the voices told me to do, and I wrecked my car and we walked all night. I had the younger one on my back, and the older one, he was maybe in kindergarten, maybe about to start kindergarten at the time, and we literally walked all night. I was barefoot, and we found a house in the daylight, and I asked the old man who lived there if he could give us a ride to town. I still don't know where we were. We were somewhere. But and then CPS got called. Um, my own family called CPS.
hmm,
Um, the kids were gone. Uh, so and I was just there alone in
hmm,
psychosis.
hmm,
My mom came. She physically came and she said, "Will you let me help you?" And I said, "No, get out of here. You just want to destroy my life." CPS had just took my kids. I said, "How can you love me? How can you want to help me?"
hmm,
But the reality is, Jim, she really did love me and she really did want to help me. And or else she wouldn't have showed up that day. If I would have gotten her pickup and went to Hope House, they would have helped me, right? I mean, I have no doubt that they would have put me on my medication and helped me. But at that point, the denial sets in. The denial sets in. No, I really am God's gift to the world, and I have to prevent World War III, or the whole human race is going to die. So you have to catch it when you're aware that you're symptomatic. If you go on for another month being symptomatic, you're going to be in crisis. And at that point, the only way to get help is if you voluntarily go or you involuntarily go.
right,
It's either you go willingly or the cops take you.
right, right, right. Yeah. On my so I've had three hospitalizations. My third one, I had a plan, a crisis plan. I didn't know what RAP was yet. I hadn't been introduced to that. But I had this plan of, if I began to feel like I was unwell, then I needed to call this friend of mine, and she would come over and see how I was doing, and I probably wouldn't be doing well. And then the plan was to call my counselor, and then my counselor would do the same thing, basically do an evaluation of me, and then get me to a behavioral health unit. And now I didn't have that in my first two hospitalizations. Everything just began to unwind, and they both ended up in suicide attempts. And but having that plan made all the difference. That made all the difference in the world, because I only had to make one phone call to say, I'm not doing well, I need some help. And a few hours later, I'm voluntarily checking in to the hospital, right? My life's not completely falling apart. My job, you know, right? You ruin your finances. And, for me, it was, I would drink. I would drink to mask or to deal with what was going on in my head, right? So the third time I was able to stay sober, use the plan, get to the hospital, get stabilized, with medications and groups and, you know, and then eventually get discharged, go back home. And it took me about a month to, kind of get back to where I could begin to function again, but boy, what a difference the third time was from the first couple of times. I mean, just so I definitely hear what you're saying, and I agree with you. It's all about having some awareness, I think, in the beginning of what are my triggers? What does it look like when I'm not doing well? And then having a plan, having something in place so you can begin to activate that plan. Because without it, it just destroys your life, right? I mean, it just destroys your life. And the system's not very good at detecting those types of things, in my opinion. Like, it needs to be external. It needs to be you and people around you. That's where the plan has to originate.
Yeah, I'm very passionate about rap. Rap has been instrumental in my ability to maintain my recovery. And one thing I want to mention for all of us who are listening who have a mental health diagnosis, if you're thinking about going off your meds and your doctor okays it, please, please take this words of wisdom and maintain the service even if you're not medicated. I mean, you can be on a 3-month schedule, you can be on a check-in and 6-month schedule, but do not give up that spot in line, because even if you're only seeing your provider every 6 months and you don't feel like you need medication right then, if you maintain that service, if you're in a crisis like I was, and I needed to get a refill of my medication, if I would have maintained service, I would have been able to have that. So if you're ever thinking or need to be unmedicated, maintain that line of service for sure.
Yeah, I think this is something that I see in my work today, with people who become peer supporters. They stop they stop doing the things that got them healthy in the first place and got them to the point where, they come to our class and take the peer support 101 class and get their certification and they get hired. And I see people stop doing the things that got them there, right? Still going to therapy or meds, like you're saying, like groups. They kind of stop doing those things because, oh well, I don't really need to because I'm a peer supporter, right? But it's like but you still have your diagnosis. These things can still happen. Yes, you're in a period of stability and things are good and you're in recovery, but your work as a peer supporter is your job, not your recovery. And you have to maintain those things. And I see peer supporters relapse. And and when I say relapse, I don't know how you feel about it, but when I say relapse, I include mental health crises in that. Some people think of it only as like substances, like using substances, but if I was to be hospitalized, that to me, it's a relapse. It's a reversion back to something in an unhealthy place for me. And I think that happens to a lot of peer supporters. They stop doing those things. They stop staying healthy, like as if they can't have another mental health crisis.
I hear you, Jim, and what you just said is the reason that I work part-time.
Mm,
I I chose to work part-time in order to still maintain my recovery.
mm,
And if I look realistically at my track record, the longest I've been able to maintain full-time employment and mental health stability is a maximum of 2 years.
mm,
So if I want to maintain my recovery, I already have longevity with what I've been doing, which is working part-time and maintaining my recovery. And it has allowed me to be in recovery for over 6.5 years, which realistically is the longest I've ever been well since I was 12 years old. So that's pretty miraculous.
yeah, yeah. How does that feel?
Oh, it's very humbling, Jim. It's a deep, humble gratitude. I don't know how else to explain it. I've I there have been 2 hospitalizations that no one was able or no one was willing to take care of where I lived when I was in there.
Mm,
So there
yeah.
were 2 hospitalizations that I lost everything I owned.
Mm,
I have no baby pictures. I have none of the scrapbooks that I made. I what I have today in my house is a maximum of 6.5 years old.
mm. How long did it take for you to get your kids back after that crisis where your kids got taken away? How long did it take to get your kids back?
That was in June, and then I was admitted to the state hospital by June 30th. I was that was the first time I lost everything I owned.
Mm,
I was discharged in September to the POV in Missoula, and we need to do another podcast on how to get out of homelessness.
this is a big issue. That is.
That's a whole nother, and I would really like to do a podcast on that in the
Sure,
future.
sure, sure.
So I was discharged to the POV,
Mhm.
and it wasn't until April that the judge let me have the kids every other weekend. So it was
From June the year before
yep,
through April of the next year.
yep. And then I would meet the boys' dad in Deer Lodge. So we would both drive and
Mm,
meet in Deer Lodge, and I would have them every other weekend.
mhm,
And now it's the opposite. Now I have them full time,
mhm,
and their dad has them every other weekend.
mm,
And it's been that way since I want to say September of 2017.
mm. So for quite a while now.
Mhm.
Yeah, because you've been able to maintain recovery.
Yes.
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
Through the
yeah.
school of hard knocks.
Well, those lessons, the lived experience. I mean, that's what makes us great peer supporters. Wouldn't you agree?
I do agree. Without the experience, we're playing from left field.
Yeah.
That's why, from the very beginning, when I got my license, I kind of told myself I don't want to work strictly with addictions.
Hmm.
Yes, co-occurring has always been a part of my story, and that was our first podcast together.
Yeah.
But I knew, I knew I didn't want to work strictly with addictions
Mhm.
because there are a lot of peer support positions within SUD treatment facilities.
Yeah.
I just have so much to offer the mental health side of peer
Mm-hmm.
support.
Mm-hmm. Do you so when you started working at the state hospital, do a lot of the patients ask you straight away, they'll ask, I know they did this for me when I ran groups there. Have you ever been hospitalized? They like qualify you. They want to qualify you. Like, have you ever really been hospitalized? Does that happen for you?
Before I do groups, I introduce myself and I ask them what they think peer support is.
Mm.
And once they answer, whoever wants to chime in,
Mm-hmm.
I tell them, that I too have been a patient there many times.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And I
Mm-hmm.
just do a introduction and I'm real with them.
Yeah.
And if they ask me, I am honest and I am
Yeah.
open.
Yeah.
Um, Sometimes you hear, as a peer support, you shouldn't share personal information, and I feel like the more honest I can be, that
Yeah.
is authenticity, and
Yeah.
that is who I am.
Yeah. 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 For sure. For sure.
And some people, who are also patients there, they remember me as a patient.
Mm.
It was pretty miraculous. I
Mm.
did see a patient who was, um, pretty much there whenever I was,
Mm.
and they said, "Hey, Sam, how you doing?"
Yeah.
And I'm like, I just was like, "You remembered me." Like
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
like, "Wow, you're peer support now? Good for you." Like,
Yeah. Yeah.
so
Yeah. 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 I can remember, when I would go and do groups, somebody would always ask, do you know what it's like? Have you ever been hospitalized? That sort of thing. Had a mental health crisis. And it's like, yeah, yeah, I have. I get it. I was never hospitalized at Montana State Hospital. Um, I was born and raised in Chicago. And so all my hospitalizations took place there before I moved out here to Montana. Um, but yeah, let's go back. Let's talk more about that. Crisis and you've shared like the impact obviously to your family and your kids, and you lost you. I mean, there's all kinds of things that happen to us: jobs, relationships, family. But I know for me, the biggest loss was the loss of my of my of my I'm trying to think how to say this, my confidence in my own thoughts, my confidence in what my brain is telling me is real or accurate. And I still to this day feel like that is the biggest loss that I there's always this thing in the back of my mind that's like, is your mind is your mind telling you the right thing here? Or and now, it's been a lot of years, so now I know to check in with other people, right? And I can check in and say, this is what I'm thinking, how does that sound to you, right? To sort of like validate that, or to get feedback to say, no, that sounds off. But what was your experience like? Do you have something like that? Like, what do you feel like your biggest loss was, or did you feel that way like I did, with you couldn't trust your own thoughts, your own mind?
what I'm thinking is, it's not completely similar, but it is.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I couldn't even look at myself in the mirror
Oh.
after what happened in 2017. I
Mm.
was completely broken.
Mm.
I I was I even so I've had the same counselor on and off since I was 19.
Mm.
I think I've had 3 other providers sparsely intermissed in there. But she's been my mainstay go-to LCPC since I was 19.
Mm.
And she asked me one day, I'm not getting much eye contact.
Mm.
I'm not I'm not getting much eye contact from you. And it's guilt and it's shame. Um, I was so broken. And when my kids came back to me, I would constantly have to tell them my eyes are right here. Like they didn't have eye contact either.
Mm.
And they were 6 and 9 before I got my life together. So it's very humbling, and that's where that very humble gratitude comes from for my recovery, because I know we did a webinar a while back. I think it was this last winter about activating events. And
Mm.
I said that we were talking about activating events, like
Mhm.
the
Mhm.
common ones would be like stress,
Mhm.
jail,
Mhm.
um,
Mhm.
a death of a loved one,
Mhm.
etc.
Mhm.
And I
Mhm.
said every day is an activating event for me. And it, and, yeah, that's the reaction, right?
Yeah,
But it's
yeah,
true.
yeah.
Every day I wake up, I have to embrace my recovery.
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
by the time I went through all of those hospitalizations, by the time it was 2017, I made a vow to myself that I was going to do 3 things every day I wake up. I was going to take my meds, I was going to stay clean and sober, and I was going to use my support system.
Mm.
And as long as I do those 3 things every day I wake up, I know I'm going to be in recovery.
Mm. Nice, nice, nice. Hmm. Was like early on for me that um, one of there was a couple of commitments I made in the beginning, a couple of goals I set. One was um, I was going to do something every day for my recovery, 6 days a week. I gave myself one day off. And when I say do something for my recovery, I mean something substantial. So it's therapy, it's a support group, right? It's connecting with others, it's um, educating myself on mental health or recovery. I'm an avid book reader. That was one of them. The other thing was I was going to get up every day and take a shower and put on clean clothes. That was something I had trouble doing when I wasn't well. That was something I didn't do when I wasn't well. Every day, I'm going to do that. And when I'm taking a shower, it's part of it is symbolic of sort of washing off the previous day or the stresses or the concerns or the so that when I step out of the shower and go to get dressed, I'm preparing for that day to be there in the moment and be the best Jim that I can be. And that is something that I've maintained, ever since. I mean, that is something I still do today. And for the first 5 years, I did something every day for my recovery, consciously doing something every day, committed to it. And not that I stopped doing it after I reached the 5 year mark, but it began to change because I had changed, right? But that commitment and having a goal and recognizing I got to do some of the work here, that this isn't just going to happen if I just take medication and go to therapy and um, everything's going to change. I'm going to have to do things consistently to keep myself healthy. And that's what I hear you. And just in knowing you, Sami, those are like, that's, it really comes to mind. And I think that that's for people with a mental health diagnosis, and whether you're co-occurring or not, I think that that's vital in maintaining recovery. And something like taking a shower, I remember saying that one time to somebody and they said, "Oh, that's not recovery. People do that." But no, that was a big deal. Like putting on clean clothes every day, that was a big deal.
Yeah. I, whenever I get in crisis, once it gets past that manic stage into psychosis, I won't shower. I won't change my clothes because I believe I'm under surveillance. Like I lose every sense of privacy that I have.
Mm,
And when you said that you're going to do one thing every day for your recovery, it reminded me years and years ago, my counselor said, do one thing every day that makes you feel competent
mm,
and confident. And if I'm going through a depression, that one thing means a lot.
yeah.
And when I go through a depression, I am making myself do things. And I believe that making myself do things through all of the counseling that I've done, all the work I've done, all the self help I've done, is I learn how to skillfully provide for myself and my needs and how to survive. And it's not a survival in a negative sense because as we grow in our recovery, we realize that some of those things we did to survive in active addiction and prior to recovery, that those really aren't helpful, right? So I think that it's really, really important to keep on the road of recovery, even if it's doing one thing each day.
Yeah. Yeah. What do you think that, you shared the story about your mom coming to see you, and what what do you think for other people, for the people in our lives, what do you think is important for them, right? If they have a loved one with a mental health diagnosis, what do you think is important for them to be doing or supporting? What's your view on that?
I actually just talked to my mom this morning,
Mm,
and I honestly have been in a depression for probably 8 months or more.
mm,
And I've been skillfully acting through it, but it is making myself do things every day. And I've been out of my depression for about a month now. And I started to get a little hypomanic. Not manic, but some of those warning signs, right?
mm, mhm,
So I was telling her, that a week ago I went back on a low dose of medication and she was asking, about the TD and if that's doing any better. Because 2 years ago I had TD really, really bad. It was affecting my eyes and making me blink all the time. And I'm a single mom. My kids play sports. I have to drive in the dark. Like, I'm going to get in an accident. It's that
mm,
serious.
mhm,
So I went on Ingrezza. And so she was asking me about that as well. And so I was explaining to her how the medication act in your brain chemistry. And she's like, well, I said, well, does that make sense? And she goes, well, kind of, as much as I can wrap my brain around it.
mm,
And I think I think for her, um, and I don't want to put words in her mouth, but just from knowing the past, She has wanted to help and she has tried to help, and I, in my sickness, push her away.
Mm.
So the one thing that I'm learning is that if I catch myself soon enough, it won't get that bad. And I hear all the time about NAMI putting on family to family
Right,
mental health trainings.
right.
And it's like a series of 8 weeks where you can go
Hmm.
once a week
Hmm.
and do family to family mental health awareness.
Hmm.
I've never personally been to one,
Hmm.
but I know that NAMI advertises those, and I
Hmm.
know if your community has a NAMI chapter, I don't see how it could hurt.
Right, right.
Because lots of times families don't understand. I remember one time my dad told me, um, if you get a job and work hard enough, you will sleep at night
Hmm.
because he knew I wasn't sleeping, right?
Hmm.
And for him, that's what makes sense. And I'm not judging my dad. I don't believe it was negative, but for him, that makes sense. And And for me, I know that that's not true for me. I mean, there was a time when I was working construction. I was doing landscaping. I was like painting in big sky. That those are hard jobs. And I was manic and soon to be psychotic and couldn't
Right,
even function after
right,
that. So
right,
so
right.
sometimes our families can be old school and not understand.
Mhm.
You hear people say, "Oh, pull yourself up from the bootstraps."
Mm.
Well,
Right,
I
right,
have a different perspective because my experience has been different. And my experience has proven to me what is effective and what is not. S-
yeah.
s-
Hmm. Yeah. And sleep is such a vital piece of overall well-being that I've experienced that. I've gone, I've had the worst I think I ever had was about 4 months where I couldn't sleep regular, either intermittent or just a few hours each night. And man, it just you can't hardly function. I can't hardly function like that. Sleep is a big piece, and it's so interesting because it's not something that gets talked about much. Early in my recovery, I went to a mental health center, and it's not something that gets talked about. That just like diet, what we eat, what we're consuming. That's another one that I have found over the years is really important for me. The sleep and what I'm eating, and those are important pieces that I have to address every single day. And it's part of my well-being. It's part of my overall well-being. Um, but those took years to understand, to raise my awareness, to educate myself, and then to be able to get routines in place so that I could stay healthy. Uh, yeah, I agree. I think for uh, family members, I think I like what you said about educating yourself. I think that's really important, and I think just unconditional love. I think that that's an important one, with friends and family members, that even when it's really scary and a person is not themselves, not acting themselves, not talking like themselves, whatever that looks like, I think that that's vital to maintain that unconditional love and not be able to separate your own stuff from what's happening with the loved one.
I agree with that. And my experience has been that now I know, looking back on it, that my family did try to talk to me and they did try to love me through it. But there was, by the time people realized that I was too far gone, I was too far gone to realize that I myself needed help because, again, that denial sets in. So then, no matter how loving and kind and tolerant my family is, their last resort is to get CPS involved, do welfare checks, get law enforcement involved. And then when you do get out, you're like, what in the world? I have to start my whole life over. And dealing with those resentments, I don't know about anybody else who has mental health disorders, but I had some pretty significant resentments
Yeah,
for
yeah,
my family calling
yeah,
CPS and getting law enforcement involved
yeah, yeah,
because I viewed it as taking my life away.
yeah. It hurt. It hurt. I mean, you're a mom, and that's deeply wounding for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah,
But if you can't catch it in time, that sometimes that is the the recourse is to get the law involved. And um I would like to do some research. I know we shared videos in PS 101 about how they deal with mental health crisis in other countries. I would be I would be really interested to do some more of that research because
mm,
Um, it is very traumatizing to go
yeah,
through a mental health crisis in the
yeah,
United States.
yeah,
It is very, very traumatizing.
yeah.
And the stigma and the lack of um, inclusiveness, like the stigma and the declassification of us as citizens
Mhm.
just because we have a crisis is very traumatizing.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I would agree. And I think in Montana in particular, I think we do a really poor job at handling um, individuals in mental health crisis. And you said this in the very beginning. Most of the stabilization centers in our state are closed today because the state of Montana doesn't want to pay, and so provider agencies can't keep functioning and running a business and not being able to recoup money to be able to function. And there definitely seems to be a lot of discrimination in that regard. We certainly don't treat someone who has a diagnosis of heart disease or cancer. We don't do that. We don't, right? Um, but we do that with mental health, and the people who I think who bear the biggest burden, um, besides the you and me, the individuals with the diagnosis, but in the system, is we sort of dump it on law enforcement, and we law enforcement, that's not their job. That's not really their responsibility to be handling mental health calls. They really are not trained to do that. And while things like CIT, crisis intervention training, um, is there to educate law enforcement, that's really not an effective tool. We need behavioral health professionals to be involved. And this is like a whole, like you said, this is a whole nother podcast that we could literally talk about within the
Yeah,
system.
we could
Yeah,
totally have a podcast about the crisis response teams, crisis intervention teams.
yeah. The centers, the stabilization centers. Yeah,
Yep,
yeah,
we could totally do that because,
yeah,
you know, CRT, Crisis Response, who does evaluations for people in crisis, they're facing the same fate
Yeah.
as the residential crisis units.
Yeah, agreed. I think the other thing to throw in there too would be to talk about the laws around being incapacitated, and how that whole system works and how broken that system is, and people don't have any support or anybody talking for them, supporting for them. And yeah, I mean, we should do that, Sammy, if you'd be willing to come back on
Yeah, I
and
am.
do.
And I want to do one on overcoming homelessness.
Yeah, that would be another one. And in fact, I have another member who I've been talking to, who wants to do one on that. So maybe we could do the three of us even, and talk about that, because that's another big one, and it's another type of crisis facing not just Montana, but our whole country. Homelessness is on the rise, and there's been a number of things happening around Montana with communities facing really high numbers of individuals who are homeless, and there's a lot of stigma around that. And
Yeah, that's happening especially in Bozeman right now.
yes, Bozeman, Billings, Kalispell, Missoula, Great Falls, Helena, all the major cities are experiencing this, and they're ill-equipped to deal with it. They're completely ill-equipped because we have a broken crisis system, and now we have homelessness. And so let's do that. Let's do another podcast, and we'll talk about overcoming homelessness and what that's like. So, well, thank you, Sammy. Thank you for your time and your vulnerability and sharing your experience here. I think it's invaluable to listeners, and I think the more we talk about these topics, and share our experiences, the more awareness we can raise out there for other individuals. And you're doing great work as a peer supporter.
Thank you, Jim. It's always great to talk to you and see you and be a part of Montana Peer Network, for sure.
Great. Well, thanks, Sammy. And thank you to our listeners for tuning in to another episode. Each week, we're putting out these podcasts, and we're talking about recovery, and we're talking about peer support. And on these podcasts, you might notice we have a new jingle going on. We got a new intro, and we're diving a little deeper into these, into our conversations, than we have ever before. So please keep tuning in and like and subscribe. Thank you.
There's always hope.
Recovery is possible. Recovery works.
There is hope in recovery.
Healing takes time.
Recovery means resilience.
You can get through anything. Recovery works.
Recovery